I really feel present tonight. It's one loud mic. Welcome to Campaign for Liberty. We are glad you're here tonight for our September meeting. The fall's begun. We should see even more and more people come, but I'm telling you, you should give yourselves a hand because we had great turnouts during the summer this time. I'm Will Sheets. I'm just here to welcome you here tonight. We're going to begin the meeting with prayer and a pledge to the flag. I'll tell you just 1 minute about who our Campaign for Liberty is all about, give you some announcements, and we're going to get right into the meeting. So let's stand together for prayer. Dear Father, we thank you for this time that we can come to you. We praise your name for who you are and all that you've done for us, especially for the freedom and the birthright that you've given to us to be born and to be living in this country. I pray that you would make us worthy, help us to be a blessing to others and to be a blessing to our country, to keep our country free for our children and our grandchildren, if it be your will in any way possible. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated. We'll breeze through this real quick, but those of you who are, how many people are brand new here tonight? Awesome! Give them a hand. That's phenomenal. If you are new and you did not get an introductory pamphlet to say who we are and what we're about, because I'm going to spend less time doing that than we normally do at a meeting, please raise your hand and Vicki will give you one. Excellent. Basically, by the way, thank you to everyone who hung the banner. A big thank you to our technical guy who we never really mentioned, but he does like a million things. He has a name, it's called Mike. But anyway, he's not just technical guy. Oh, not this guy. That guy's Mike too. Yeah, and please help him out by muting yourself if you would, so that doesn't interrupt the meeting. Want to mention that we're guests here of the Knights of Columbus. We do pay for the room. We'll talk about that later. But Jerry has been incredibly gracious to us over the years, and we'd love for you to patronize him back there. He has coffee, tea, soft drinks, mixed drinks, beer and wine, so feel free, just like you were at a tavern meeting in 1776, to go back there. That's what I think of it as, to go back there and partake. Thank you, Mike. Anyway, Campaign for Liberty basically believes in these principles: individual liberty, constitutional government, and also sound money. Oh, we went right through it. That's good. Sound money, free markets, and a non-interventionist foreign policy. And if you don't see how that would be beneficial, as all the founding fathers did, you can certainly see how unbeneficial a very, very interventionist foreign policy really, really is. So at this time, I want to go right into our first speaker, because we have some excellent speakers tonight. And this gentleman is in the intelligence field. I aspire to be anywhere near the intelligence field. Crowe has been in the military for 18 years. He's in intelligence right now. He's going to talk to us about critical thinking. It's something that each one of us should know about. It's a way to actually judge what we're seeing, what's happening, how to judge information. And with no further ado, I'm going to introduce Crowe.
Good evening, my name is Crowe, as I was just introduced. But before we begin, I'd like to lay out some ground rules and just some other things. Number one, I don't know if there are aliens in Nevada over Area 51. I don't know what happened to JF Kennedy, and I don't know where Jamie Hoffa's buried at. So, being intelligent, there's a couple ground rules I'm going to lay out first. And the first one is that as I'm up here, the things I'm going to talk about, sometimes they be controversial. These are not intended to actually rile any type of animosity. So the things that you will not hear me say, I will not talk bad about this administration or any other previous administration. I do believe in that as a military professional, that you do support your commander-in-chief and you hold your own personal opinions to yourself as a matter of professionalism. With that being said, the other caveat that I have to throw into this is because I am being honest and upfront with everybody about what my career field is within the military. When you ask me questions, when I tell you that this is what I think, this is my considered opinion, it is not based off of anything else that I have access to. This is just my opinion, being a free-thinking individual and, you know, just a guy who actually cares. So, slide please. Okay, this is some of the things that we're going to talk about. Not tonight, because I will not be able to get through all this tonight. This is actually broken down into a two-part series. So I'm only going to introduce the first half of this, and then we'll finish up at a later date when I worked it out with Vicki. Some of the concepts we're going to talk about tonight are very heavy and they're very deep. So it actually takes a little while to actually begin to grasp all these different concepts. But once you actually get a mastery of it, and I will show this at the end on the second half of this presentation, you can actually use it in real time, and you can actually begin to break down people's arguments and actually identify both disinformation, propaganda, and other things that are being thrown at us at all times. Slide, please. Okay, so what was the impetus behind me putting this PowerPoint brief together? Within the intelligence field, I noticed that there was a lack of something called critical thinking, and I'm sorry, I'm not a guy who likes to hang out behind the podium. I know that's shared. So, the lack of critical thinking within the intelligence career field actually was a big problem. What ends up happening is most of the guys end up being able to regurgitate stats and spit it out, but lack the analytical process to actually figure out what and why things are going on. So that's what started this. Now, as I progressed through this, I realized that I could actually use this and see this all around us, and that there was actually some value to it. So up here I have Rene Descartes, who stated, "I think, therefore I am." This is actually a throwback to some of the topics I'm going to talk about, starting with Aristotle. We're going to talk about Aristotle's logical fallacies, so I'm going to break those down and show you how they're applied today in terms of arguments, debates within the political realm. Slide, please. All right, this is just, again, a pie chart of a methodology that everybody can use in terms of applying it to a different problem set or any type of information that we all encounter every single day. So the takeaway is simply this. All of us are biased. We all have a bias in the way that we receive information, the way that we digest that information, and the way that we then come to some type of conclusion or some type of analysis of that situation. You have to understand that to begin anything. There's a specific way it's built on your life experience and the things that have happened throughout your thought process. This actual methodology is something that you can actually take something and apply it to any part of these stages and work it around the wheel in order to reach a logical conclusion. Slide, please. Okay, so this is actually a late addition to this presentation. This is not about red versus blue, it's not about politics, and I am a gamer, so I just threw up this slide up there for Halo. So that was my eye candy. So what I want to take away from this slide. So, there's a guy by the name of George Hegel, and he coined something called the Hegelian dialect. All right, Hegel was actually the progenitor, the intellectual progenitor of Karl Marx and Engels before you started seeing the Communist Manifesto and the way that that was actually applied to Nazi Germany and actually throughout the U.S. So there are two different parts of Hegel's philosophy, his dialect, which we see evident today in our society. So the first one is actually what I call putting people inside of a box. What he theorizes is that we as humans can only understand things in polar opposites. All right, and once you're actually placed in these boxes, then you can move on to the phase two. So, to show you how pervasive this has actually been in our society, this is where I'd like to take everybody through a little mental exercise. And feel free to call out. This is a really informal thing for me. If you have questions and you want to shoot them out during the brief, please, by all means. So, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to fill in the blank. All right? When I say Democrat versus white versus men versus gay versus straight. Let's go. Pro-life versus pro-choice. All right. So once you've identified that there are two polar opposites, all right, then you end up moving into the next phase, which is actually what Hegel theorized was called the thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, more commonly known as problem, reaction, solution. All right. You have two factions against each other right now. An individual or something introduces the problem into the equation. Then you have the reaction where both factions fight each other, and then whoever introduced that problem steps in to offer the solution. Okay? So, A good example of this is actually going to be within the Democratic Party, actually within the black community, you'll hear a term something like activating your base. So what does activating your base actually mean?
Getting people motivated.
Getting people motivated. So within the black community, how do you do that? Or how's it been done? Through a racial incident. You introduce the problem, all right? Doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a self-defense case in Florida or whether it's some other incident that's happening somewhere else in the world or somewhere else in the country, you introduce the problem. Then you watch as both sides fight each other about that problem. And then you will step in later and say, well, you know what? If you vote for me, I'll make sure that I can solve this problem. The government does this all the time, and it's not just within the Democratic Party, it's also within the Republican parties too. All right? Again, when we analyze Hegel and we start looking at the polar opposites of each other, they're specifically designed to put you into a box so you can be easily controlled and placed against each other and not ask the real questions. So a good example is we know that Democrats historically are for raising taxes, and Republicans, their party line is supposed to be for lowering taxes, right? So we sit there and we argue over percentages about the raising and lowering. But what's the real question we need to ask? Why do we have an income tax? You see, when you step outside the box and refuse to play the game, you start to see the conflict a little differently. Another great example of this too is for those of us who were supporting Ron Paul back in 2008, what was the one thing that we were told that the supporters would do if we voted for Ron Paul?
Disenfranchise, waste your vote.
Yes, waste your vote. The Republican Party would lose that. You'd split the party. The Democrats would win, all this other thing. Because what did that actually represent when we start talking about the Hegelian dialect? It represented a threat, a third entity outside of the two boxes, outside of the two factions. All right, and once you do that, that concept is broken, is defeated. Okay, so this is important to keep in mind because as we go through this, what I'm going to demonstrate is that a lot of this has more to do with power than it does anything else. I was talking to my man out in the parking lot about Obamacare. Seems like a simple thing to do, right? The House controls bills originating the revenue. All they have to do is defund Obamacare. Republicans hold a majority. So why is it so hard to defund Obamacare? And you can't answer.
They bought off.
Part of it.
Special interest.
So what has been the biggest calling card, the biggest campaign fundraiser or recruiting tool for the Republican Party? Obamacare. It serves a purpose for them to keep it active, to keep it in your craw, to keep you upset about it, because then you will flock to them, and then by default, they are amassing more power under the voting construct, along with other things as well. It plays a role. They actually tell it to you, and most of us, again, we have to be able to hear it. But what was the mantra when they started talking about repealing Obamacare? It was repeal and what? Replace. That means they didn't want to get rid of it. They were going to put their version of it in, whether it was good or bad. All right, slide. Okay, so this is all in Latin. I apologize for it being small, but we'll go through each one of these as we go through. This is Aristotle's 11 logical fallacies. These logical fallacies are specifically designed, or I wouldn't say designed, but he coined these different logical fallacies in response to how we interpret or how we debate each other, or how we interact with different pieces of information, and some of the fallacies inherent in our own concept of logic. So, next slide, please. So, what is a fallacy? A fallacy is a deceptive argument that appears to be logically valid, but is in fact invalid. Its conclusion will be unreliable at best, downright false at worst. As I go through these, I'm going to have some examples to try to illustrate this. And again, this is not designed to get anybody riled up about some of the examples that I'll have out there. It's specifically designed to show you an effect. So the first one we have is argumentum ad populum. So that is Latin. What it means is consensus or head count fallacy. We are told that many people say they believe a thing to be so. That is no evidence that many people say it is. So if you want to flip over real quick. So, majority of the people support increased taxes. The majority of the country support increased surveillance. All right? Two statements that rely on the logical fallacy of the head count being the majority. All right, it's just it's a term. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's a majority of the people, but what it does within the logical process is that most people then assume that, oh, if it's a majority, then everyone must be doing it, without digging any further into actual stats. You see this a lot in political campaigns when they start talking about polling data, when they have a statistical representation, and when you actually look at how many people they ask the question to, it's like 1,200 people. And you're like, there are 300 million of us in the country. How did you get a majority from 1,200 people? So that's how you are able to get through that logical fallacy in terms of the head count fallacy.
Ira, use the mic just so
I'm sorry.
I can hear better. And Jerry loves to hear it back with the compressor. So
I thought Jerry, you heard this, Jerry. Sorry. Slide, please. All right. The next two, argument of ad veracundum, which is their reputation or appeal to authority fallacy. This is actually one that you see all the time. I'll get into that in a minute. And then the next one is the fallacy of arguing from ignorance. So, slide, please. Okay, so the appeal to authority usually has to deal with somebody who has some type of position of authority or has some type of credentials that they actually throw out there. So the first thing you always hear when you start talking about getting into a debate with somebody, he'll come up there and say, well, I have a doctorate in such and such, a master's in this, I have blah, 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 this, I did that. That's great. That does not necessarily mean he knows what he's talking about. All right? So the actual logical fallacy here is designed to get you to automatically assume, all right, that that person must be very well versed or educated in whatever the next topic is going to be, and therefore it kind of disarms you right from the beginning. Same thing with me getting up here, 18 years, such and such, and everything else, which, you know, I'm not a big intro guy, but it can still set up some type of appeal to authority. The appeal to ignorance, this is an interesting one. All right, so the claim that whatever has not been proved false must be true. So if you have not proved it false, then by default it has to be true. And I use the jokingly one, the example up there of the UFOs. So there's no compelling evidence that UFOs are not visiting the Earth, therefore UFOs exist. Again, the logical fallacy, because there's an absence of something, you're arguing from ignorance. A good example of this that we saw a couple months back with the Boston Marathon bombing, right? We didn't know what the cause was, and all the data was still coming in. It was still, a very fluid situation. But one particular news outlet came out and started assigning blame to the Tea Party. Right? So part of that is disinformation, part of that is playing on logical fallacies. And as we progress through this, what you're going to see is that you can rack and stack them. You can have a logical fallacy that plays on a cognitive bias, which then is fed by disinformation. So it's really difficult to swim through all this stuff as you actually get through it. It took me a long time to get to this point, a lot of studying. And again, I will tell you, I am no expert by any means. I'm just a guy who decided to get in the fight. Slide, please. All right, ignoratio elenchi. So we have the red herring fallacy, and then we have the fallacy of inappropriate pity. The red herring fallacy. All right, this is simply. All right, this is simply where you make a statement and then somebody throws something out in order to throw you off that topic. That's where the term actual red herring came from, if I remember correctly. It had something to do with hunting, and to throw dogs off the scent, they would drag a rotted red herring across the scent track to throw the dogs off the scent. The inappropriate pity, we hear this all the time, especially with Common Core, which Bob will talk about here soon, is this appeal to kids and starving children and everything else. It plays on an emotional bias, which I don't know if I have time to get into tonight, but it's a cognitive bias that they actually use for logical fallacy. So the statement I have up here, gun manufacturers should do something about all those guns they have lying around. My grandson was brutally murdered last summer by another kid with a Glock. Two totally separate statements, all right? And because they are linked together, they try to play on each other. It is unfortunate that the gun manufacturer should do something about all the guns they have lying around. There's a whole bunch of logical fallacies just in that statement alone, assuming that gun manufacturers are just willy-nilly throwing guns out to the street, unaccounted for. But then when you tie it to the inappropriate pity, which is my grandson was brutally murdered last summer by another kid with a Glock. Very sad story. My heart goes out to the man, but the two are mutually exclusive. The gun manufacturer didn't leave a gun laying around that then, his son picked up a Glock and got shot, or he got shot by another kid. But they tie the two together in order to facilitate the logical fallacy. Next slide, please. All right. The argument from false cause, which is post hoc ergo propter hoc, and argumentum ad, I'm not even try that one. Circular argument fallacy. Okay. The argument false cause, merely because one event precedes another, it does not necessarily cause it. All right, we saw that again with the gun manufacturer statement previously. I'll show you another example here. This is where, and then the circular argument fallacy is where a premise is also the conclusion. Slide. So, Hurricane Katrina caused massive devastation in New Orleans. As a result, the stock market dropped 200 points. Okay? Two totally separate statements. One did not cause the other, but you'll see a lot of this again within politics as people started linking things together. Another example I actually pulled from Lord Monckton here. We tell the computer models that there will be strong storms if we add CO2 to the air. The models then show there will be a strong storm, therefore the storm is our fault. It's a circular argument because we actually inputted something into that argument, and therefore the result that came out of it was strictly because we inputted something that did not exist in it. The dictos simpliciter, the fallacy of accident, the fallacy of converse accident. This is going from general to specific and specific to general. A warm summer caused Hurricane Katrina. Not necessarily the case. It's going from something big to something specific. Hurricane Katrina caused a warm summer. You just flip it. Something specific to something big. Okay. These are the two that you'll see the most when we start getting into the political realm. The attack on the man rather than on his argument, which is argument ad hominem. And then the argument of force, argument ad vacuum. All right, so the attack on the man rather than his argument, we've heard this all before. The argument, you want to, do something about the immigration bill. Guy comes out and says, you're racist. Has nothing to do with what you're talking about, the original comment, but what it does in terms of logical fallacy. And if you buy into it, the next thing you end up doing is you try to defend the racist comment, and you are no longer talking about the original topic. You start attacking the man's character in order to distract. It's almost in the same vein as the red herring as well. When we talk about the argument of force, go to the next slide. A good example that I have here is, and this actually, again, took place, if you don't accept that the sun orbits the earth rather than the other way around, then you'll be excommunicated from the church. The force being that there is a price to pay for not accepting what you're being told. Therefore, the sun orbits the earth rather than the other way around. You go ahead and accept it. So that's the argument of force. That is an entity that's using its intimidation factor, per se, in order to compel some type of a thought process. Right. So this is where we start getting into the actual cognitive biases. And again, I briefly talked about this where we are all biased in how we actually interpret data and how we pull things together. So I'm going to show you some of the things that are actually used against us and played against us in terms of our biases. So, all right, attentional bias. The tendency to pay attention to mostly dominant stimuli in one's environment and to neglect relevant data when making judgments of correlation or association. You see this a lot in the last 30 days of most campaigns. What they try to do is they try to throw all the stuff at you so it'll stick in your memory before you go to the voting booth, and hoping that you pay attention long enough to, forget everything else that happened, the 18 months prior to the last 30 days. The availability cascade, this is actually something that was well used in, I think it was Joseph Mengele used this. Self-reinforcing process in which a collective belief gains more and more plausibility through its increasing repetition. Basically, if you repeat something long enough, it will become true, even if it's a lie. All right, so that is called the availability cascade, and that's used all the time. And what we call those, actually in the media, are talking points. Talking points are constantly repeated over and over and over again. And again, they boil down probably a very complex issue down to a 30-second soundbite, which we've all seen this before, and then you just repeat that 30-second soundbite, and you never get past that soundbite in terms of going back to the complexity of the issue and actually discussing the real issue.
Like gun violence.
Yep. A whole brief on that. The backfire effect, when people react to disconfirming evidence and strengthen their beliefs, this is literally that you will show somebody that 2 + 2 = 4, and they say, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. You know, it's actually a bias that's actually inherent in that person to refuse to see it. Talk about the bandwagon effect, the tendency to or believe things because many other people do the same thing. Groupthink is basically what the term is that was coined. I think George Orwell did that with groupthink. And you also see now there's a cognitive bias that actually works hand in hand with logical fallacy as well, which is the head count fallacy. Slide. Confirmation bias, the tendency to search for or interpret information or memories in a way that confirms one's own preconceptions. If I believe that the sky is blue, all right, then I'm going to look for evidence to support the fact that I believe it's blue. Even if there's evidence that says that it's actually yellow, I throw that evidence out because I believe it to be blue, so I'm only going to look for evidence that's blue. You see this a lot again, like he said, with gun violence, when we talk about debating, you know, actually just the Second Amendment in general. So people who are anti-gun are going to look for evidence to support that, but it also works the other way too. People who are pro-gun are also going to look for evidence to support that as well. That's actually a bias, a confirmation bias. Empathy gap, again, you tie this in with the inappropriate pity logical fallacy, and this is the tendency to underestimate the influence of strength or feelings on either one or somebody else. You can never underestimate the power of emotion when it comes to overriding your logical process. Right? And that's what's played all the time. When you see the emotion of fear, the emotion of remorse, or what we talked about before with the images of starving kids, all those things are designed to elicit an emotional response from you and drive you into action to, your different boxes to do something without actually thinking through the process logically. Framing effect, this is just basically a bias on how information is presented to you. If I am the keeper of all the information and I present it to you in a certain way, I'm doing it because I want you to think in a certain way. I will hold some stuff back, I may give you more stuff, but I will control that information and frame it. And you hear that all the time, especially when you watch some of the news, which is, hey, we need to frame the argument. Every time you hear that, they're talking about controlling information and playing on a bias. The hostile media effect, this is actually another good one. I have a buddy who gets all his news from Fox News. Not saying it's wrong or right, that's just what he watches. He won't watch anything else. He won't watch MSNBC, CNN, or any other outlet. Personally, I wouldn't watch any of them. But what ends up happening is, if he sees something on MSNBC, he automatically discounts it and throws it away. All right, he doesn't give it any credibility because of where it came from. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong. It just means that you need to be able to discern a little bit better about what information is coming in. Slide. All right. Normalcy bias. This is a good one. This is the equivalent of sticking your head in the sand and acting like nothing's happening. I have another individual who I gave an emergency management brief to, and she talked to me about how in her fridge she has nothing but mustard and some other stuff. A year later, when I asked her about whether or not she'd done anything to help her emergency situation, emergency prep stuff out, she had done nothing. The normalcy bias basically states that because nothing bad is happening, nothing ever will happen. All right?
Right.
So when you it's basically sticking your head in the sand instead of actually looking outside of that paradigm and saying, just because it hasn't happened doesn't necessarily mean that it won't happen. Then maybe there's something I need to do about it. Recency bias, again, we talk about that with the last 30 days of a campaign. It's a cognitive bias that results from disproportionate salience attributed to recent stimuli or observations. Basically, if it's recent, it's more recent in your head, you tend to remember that versus the historical stuff. So that's why, short memory, yeah, it's basically short memory. And then stereotyping. This is probably the last one that I have for tonight. Stereotyping, again, goes back to the boxes that we talked about. Within each of those boxes that we just talked about, whether it's pro-life, pro-choice, whether it's Republican, whether it's Democrat, whatever it might be, whether it's black or white, people within those boxes are expected to behave in a certain manner. All right? It's called towing the company line, towing the party line. You're not black if you don't do X, Y, and Z. You're not white if you don't do X, Y, and Z. And because that stereotyping, it's a cultural thing, it's very powerful in coercing behavior and your thought process. slide. All right, so I think I am close to time. I am willing to, how much time do I have left?
It's 7:30, you got a little more
A
time.
little bit more time.
We rarely say that hour, so.
Take advantage of it, right? I'm trying to fly with this. Does anyone have any questions before I try to crush this in 15 minutes? Yeah.
There are a lot of newspapers and magazines that are to the right. There are a lot that are to the left. Who am I supposed to believe?
You.
Me.
You. Trust in
You
your
don't
judgment.
walk around Washington, hon, I don't know.
Trust in your judgment. That's all I can really say. Somebody else asked me up in Cecil County, about a news outlet, I think the Russian Times. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean that what they're saying is not true, but you have to understand that they also have an agenda as well. You have to see who they're controlled by and things of that nature. Same thing with the media outlets. We like to think that most of them are,
Non-biased.
non-biased, right? But their bias doesn't necessarily rest in their ideology as much as it rests in who's paying the bill.
Exactly.
So, and know that going in, right?
Look for the ring of truth, that's what I always say.
So-
Rings true.
Because we are discussing these things now, when you go back and start reading your newspapers that are on the left or on the right, hopefully you'll be able to discern the actual fact in both and come to a truth.
What if you wrote to a newspaper and dared them to have one page of good news? Do you think they would do that, or they would just like me and say,
Yeah, I can't speak for them.
There's a lot of independent journalists on YouTube, that have channels and stuff you should check out as well.
really?
They're not controlled by the mainstream media.
You look for the ones that aren't big money. Big money.
Ma'am?
Yeah, well, I'm sorry, I came in late, or I didn't hear what you said. What position do you have with the military? You're with the military?
Yes.
What position are you?
I'm a military officer?
A military officer. Okay, you're not like counterintelligence or anything, are you?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
We got one in Cecil that didn't come back because of it, but I'd rather he not come back, so we're good on that. We're good on that.
Very enlightening. Very enlightening. Thank you very much. Gives us a lot to think about.
Do you have a website or anything where you have all this information?
No, not right now.
Okay.
Sorry.
So you just go around giving the talk?
Well, right now, I've only been, dealing with this issue for maybe 4 or 5 months now. So,
Very good. How did you get interested in this?
just through research, really. Just reading and understanding certain things and wanting to delve deeper into it and just broaden my my understanding of the world and what goes on around us.
Well, appreciate it.
Are you going to run for office?
No. No intention to run. So I'm going to wait until next time we get together to go into this because it's actually going to take probably more time than I'm willing to allocate to it now that I can't allocate to it. So what you're going to see at the end of this, the next time I hopefully get up here and talk, is that there is a video of an individual who was talking about Common Core. What I did was I went and broke down minute by minute exactly the different logical fallacies that are in play, the disinformation that comes out, and what was most important is things that she said and the things that she did not say. And then when you actually see this applied to a real-world problem set, you'll understand how pervasive and how easy it is to slide through these different fallacies and cognitive biases.
You said a logic fallacy?
Logical fallacy. Yeah, Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, they all did a lot of the logical fallacies. They're the fathers of it. Sir?
I would say that it's a balanced statement to say that it's what is not said, what is omitted,
Yes.
what is
Yes.
omitted.
Yes. But see, again, we're all conditioned to the point where we only hear what's being told to us because we're not thinking about what's not being said. And you're right, it's just as important what's not being said because what that does, if you're able to get to that point, you'll then start to ask that question
That's why
about what's not being
politicians
said.
never answer the question, they just tell you what they want to say.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. I really have nothing. I don't really know what to do here. We've never had anybody end early. Thank you, Ira. Let's give him another hand. What's that?
Want to read the Maryland Constitution?
Read the Maryland Constitution. There you go. We're going to do a couple things here. This is our time when we do a little bit of open mic in just a moment, but I want to make sure everybody understands how it works here at Campaign for Liberty. I mean, my salary is huge, so we've got to take... Actually, I'm paid nothing, and people think that I'm overpaid, but that's another story. In a moment, we're going to hand out, we're going to pass around the thing. This costs us $250 at night when we do this meeting here. We have lots of other mailing and robocall and all that kind of stuff expenses, so we'd love it if you contribute to that, help us out with that. That'd be perfect for us. Who's here who is new, who did not get a red ticket? You guys didn't get a red ticket as a new? Okay. How do I have any tickets? Who's here that's new that did get a red ticket? All right. Okay. There are people. Okay. All right. We're going to do a door prize drawing, and the winner gets a lovely Campaign for Liberty T-shirt. You don't have to stick with small. Don't get frightened by this. There's other this, and if you need to lose weight, come see me, because you'll need it to get in this T-shirt.
I'll train you.
All right, she's got two big ones. All right, so our winner of the T-shirt tonight is, just read the last three numbers, 227, 227, 227, 227. All right, there he is, all right. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Oh, you even gave me his ticket. I don't know if you know, we're testing here. No one has to give us a ticket. Again, right now I'm going to pass these around. There'll be some starting from the back. If you guys don't mind, Scott, start passing these around. We just appreciate everything that you do, because without you being here, there's no Campaign for Liberty. We're not funded by some national Campaign for Liberty or anything. We're funded by us. So we appreciate that. All right, at this time I'd like to do open mic, and if those people, probably people would come forward. Dan DeLuzzo, and then Dave Brower, you're on deck, and Betty LeBron, you're in the hole.
There's nothing better for me than to be around patriots, and I thank you all for being who you are. I really want to caution you that there's a lot happening now. October 1st is coming, the end of the fiscal year, of course, and what I want to tell you is try to get in touch with each other. Try to keep each other informed of what you see and what occurs. There was an old thing that in the Carpathian Mountains, there was a group of a monastery, about 50 monks, and every year one of them would be able to say one sentence. So the one year, one monk got up and said, "This soup is too hot." And a year passes. Another monk gets up and said, "This soup is too cold." And the third year passes, and the third monk gets up and said, "I can't stand the bickering anymore." And what I'm saying is that there is a very wide time between us meeting and a full month. I appreciate very much the board is letting me speak next month. I have a good topic. We're going to talk about the militarization of our police force and SWAT teams, and the research is really frightening. But the time between us meeting and being with patriots, I work in the guts of the city, right in the bowels of the city. Gay Street and Baltimore Street is our office, and it's really fun. It's such a pleasure to be with you all. My heart goes out to every one of you. I love every one of you for being what you are. But since there is so much time between times that we meet, be cautious, interconnect with each other, connect with each other, call each other, network each other. Use our website if we can, so that we can create little networking groups where we can give information to each other. We must keep more communication together. That's our vigilance right now. There is a compression in history that I call it. Years and years ago, it would take very long time to get from one point to another. It took months to go from Europe to America at one time. Now things happen very rapidly, and it's very important that you have a network formulated. I want to thank you all, and I look forward to next month's meeting and speaking with you. Thank you. God bless you.
God bless you too.
I just came across two quotes from Thomas Jefferson that caught my attention. I'm guessing they're from about the 1800s. In his remarkable wisdom, Jefferson warned that the legislature and the courts should not make laws so complex as to conceal their meaning and make the understanding of their implications so convoluted as to render them incomprehensible by those for whom they were ostensibly created. Laws are made for men of ordinary understanding and should, therefore, be construed by ordinary rules of common sense. Their meaning is not to be sought for in metaphysical subtleties, which may make anything mean everything or nothing at pleasure. Unfortunately, the law today is barely comprehensible in its scope to even those who legislate and interpret it. That caught my attention as I think he foresaw the arrival of the present occupant in the White House. Thomas Jefferson warned, "I place economy among the first and most important virtues, and public debt as the nearest dangers to be feared. To preserve independence, we must not let our rulers load us down with perpetual debt. When all government shall be drawn to Washington as the center of all power, it will render powerless the checks provided of one government upon another. We are directed from Washington, were we directed from Washington to sow and when to reap, we should soon want bread. The forehorse of this frightened team is public debt, taxation, follow that, and in its turn, wretchedness and oppression." And Jefferson concluded, "We must make our election between economy and liberty or profusion and servitude."
Very good.
We should always have a Thomas Jefferson section, shouldn't we?
Oh my gosh.
Thank you, Dave.
Mega dittos, Thomas Jefferson. Wow. I was at the rally yesterday in Annapolis. Some said there was about 100 of us there. I think it was a little more, maybe closer to 150. My picture appears on page 13 of this leftist rag that I don't buy. But my neighbor gave it to me. There she is, Betty LeBron of Owings Mills. Holding my sign. I haven't joined the NRA yet, but I had the sign. I'm the NRA and I vote. It was marvelous. Nancy Jacobs, most of the time she gets it right. She's our friend. She's very good. Mike Smeagol is a gift. If you're represented by him, I envy you. I'm represented by 4 knuckleheads in my 11th district in Owings Mills. And those knuckleheads went ahead, in spite of our testifying and rallying, they still went and it was a little committee done with outside the judicial process, of course, Maryland. They passed these further restrictions that were taken out of the original gun grabbing bill. But I have every confidence that much of this gun grabbing law will be struck down. Much of it will be struck down in court. That's a prophecy because it is unconstitutional. One more minute. And when I testified in that hearing room, it was packed. It was about 200 people. Oh, thank you. About 200 people, and I held this in their faces. I said, "This is our founding document. It's a law of our land." And I also said, "You have taken a solemn oath to follow and obey this document. And if you don't like following this document," I really did say this. I said, "I suggest you get out of your job and go find a private sector job." And they all just sat there.
Good job.
run, my boldness comes from God Almighty. For some reason, He's given it to me. I used to be a professional singer, so I am fearless in front of an audience. I used to be scared to death when I started singing as a small child. But now I'm fearless. I'm not scared of them. We have this. So I've waved it in their faces. And at the end of my testimony, I said, God save America from tyrannical, and he was, yes, thank you, from tyrannical, overreaching big brother government. And then I got up and I walked back to my seat. You should have heard the testimonies. But 9 to 6, look it up. I don't have a computer. Look it up. See who voted to, again, force these restrictions down our throats. And one more thing. I was also interviewed by Dave Collins on WBAL TV. I was on last night briefly on WBAL. I went to the rally June 19th, Obamacare. And our heroes are Senators Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, Mike Lee, Michelle Bachmann, Louis Gohmert, Duncan of South Carolina. Call them and thank them. I gave John Boehner some choice words when I called him Friday before last. And Boehner now, he is coming along with us. He can be pushed into doing the right thing. But I have a feeling it wasn't my phone call. He probably got several thousand like mine. But I said, I'm reminding you of your promise in July of 2012. It was a voicemail. I said, you promised you'd do away with Obamacare. Are you going to honor your promise? I said, you could lose your speakership and your seat. So I really gave it to him. So that was the Friday after the Tea Party. And he has come over to our side. He can be pushed into doing the right thing. Push. Ted Cruz is filibustering right at this minute. Pray for him.
You go.
Yeah, Ted is filibustering, which is phenomenal.
I just had one thing that was, this has been on my mind for a couple days, and it kind of plays into what we're talking to tonight about, information, disinformation, etc. Many of you have probably gotten an email recently lamenting the fact that we're being hosed. Anybody got that email? We're being hosed by the county executive, David Craig, is talking about how we're being hosed by the rain tax. Who's gotten that email? Anybody gotten that email? We're being hosed? Okay. This is a classic example of the politician during election season doing nothing during the legislative season. And what we do here at Campaign for Liberty is connect the legislative season with the election season and have an effect on the indirect path to power. David Craig sends out emails about how we're being hosed, yet he did nothing to stop this rain tax. He was asked to join in by other counties to fight this, and he did nothing. He did nothing. And I'm not going to stand up here and I'm not going to submit. I'm a registered Republican, and I'm not going to let people say things and portray themselves to be something other than what they are. He also did nothing when SB 281, the tier maps, came down. He was asked, will you have public hearings so that we can look at these tier maps? Hartford County only had one tier map drawn out. Development is basically off limits in Hartford County, except if you're on the Route 24, 924, or Route 40 corridor. He did nothing. He was asked to join in other counties to fight against this. He did nothing. And he not only did nothing, he said, well, we are a charter government. I don't have to have public hearings. Even though when he was pressed on the interest of transparency in government that he should, he did not. All right? So it's omission. Don't listen to what they say. Listen to what they don't say. Don't look at what they do. Look at what they don't do. And he's done nothing. But he wants to be your next governor so that you can count on the fact that if, by God, he's elected and he gets down into Annapolis, he'll be cutting deals with Democrats like a true Schaefer Democrat that he is. And do nothing. Do nothing. He's all against Common Core now, too. But he did nothing to fight against it when it was being implemented. So having said all of that, this brings us to our next topic, and I'm going to kind of bridge Ira and Bob here. Here's what Thomas Jefferson said, and we can apply this too since it's Thomas Jefferson night. Man, once surrendering his reason, has no remaining guard against the absurdities most monstrous. And I just lost it because it took off on me. Where is it? Always does that.
Hey, Scott, don't forget, when we spent 2 years trying to get Harford County out of Italy before we were...
Oh, thank you, Vicki. Not only that, he also created an Office of Sustainability. He got us into ICLEI, which is the implementation of Agenda 21. And under pressure, he finally got out of ICLEI. He didn't get out of ICLEI. He didn't renew the membership. He didn't have enough principle to say, I'm going to withdraw now that I know what I know. He let the membership expire. But we still have an Office of Sustainability that has a budget of hundreds of thousands of dollars that helps implement this kind of stuff. Planned Maryland is also going to help you with the obesity task force so that you don't drink too many big gulps. But here's what Thomas Jefferson said that kind of tie this all together. Man, once surrendering his reason, has no remaining guard against the absurdities most monstrous, which a ship without a rudder is the spot of every wind. With such persons, gullibility, which they call faith, takes the helm from the hand of reason, and the mind becomes a wreck. Thank you.
Strings.
Okay, hi everybody, I'm Vicki. Most of you know that. I want to give you, well, I was supposed to be giving you a brief update on the rain tax task force, but there won't be much of an update because the last two meetings were canceled by the task force. It hasn't rained enough. You get taxed whether it rains or not. Yeah, that's right. Whether it rains or not, you're paying. But there's a couple of reasons why. At the last meeting I went to, which was back in August, Christine Buckley, I believe is her name, she works for the Department of Public Works. She was given just an incredible load of work that she needed, information that she needed to collect and prepare for the task force to do their work. There were certain questions that needed to be answered. So that has not yet been completed. The other reason, however, is on October the 1st, David Craig will be introducing legislation to the county council to repeal the previous rain tax bill in Harford County. Everything Scott said was true. He had been asked to join we had asked the county council and sent some requests to the county executive to join with the Clean Chesapeake Coalition and other counties, that instead of just finding a way to happily comply with tyranny, how could we fight it like Frederick County, like Carroll County, like Western Maryland, and that didn't happen. But now, yes, he has obviously some other motivations for wanting to fight this egregious injustice. So we're happy for that, but again, why? And why did we have to wait so long for this? So should that be repealed, my guess is that, you know, the task force and particularly the Department of Public Works, they have better things to spend their time on than, you know, busy work getting ready to look into legislation that is going to be repealed in the end anyway. So that's my update. There's nothing, you know, nothing has really happened. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about tonight is our action item. How many folks out there saw the video of the parent in Baltimore County? How many people in this room? Has anybody not seen it? Has anybody not seen this totally viral video? Okay. Well, you know what? We actually are ahead of schedule, so let's go ahead and show the video then. We weren't going to show it because we figured you'd all see it, but it's always worth a good see. It'll get your blood going. It's only 3 minutes, so. And I want you to see that lady right there. Look at how she smiles, the lady. Does anybody remember the Harry Potter movie where the pink lady, she was always smiling and she was most evil one, that's what she reminds me of.
I'd like to take Mr. Bailey's advice and kind of challenge you guys on the spot. Because, you know,
Can you hold on for 1 minute? Because many questions actually dovetail from that. And so I'm trying them all together. So I want to get to as many as we can. I do want to get to as many questions as we can. So if you could.
It's actually for the parents. It's not really for you guys. I want to know how many parents here are aware that the goal of the conflict for standards isn't to prepare our children for world-class universities. It's to prepare them for community college.
Okay, let me do this. Let me do this.
I have personal knowledge of this. I grew up there. Not the best schools. I still think they're not the best schools, but I love them.
Sir, I will say this. Out of all fairness to everyone who submitted questions.
Community college. I finished at the University of Maryland. And now I moved my family out to Howard County because of the reputation of the schools.
Okay, so in all fairness to other parents who submitted questions, I do want to be fair, sir.
Community college. And, you know, it's so
Sir.
my question is, how are we talking about college? You're not talking about which college. You're not preparing them for world Harvard. Okay, my question is, how is lowering America's educational standards to prepare kids for community college? Because that's what it's all about. Because you mentioned before that, you know, the emphasis is, and I have some stuff here to quote before this guy tries to carry me out.
Okay.
But, hey, listen, parents, take control. We're sitting, this is not a CNN political debate. Let's go.
Let him ask his question.
This is what I will say, in fairness to everyone who asked questions, we do have some that are dovetailing to that.
Let him ask his question.
So the next question. So this is a dovetail.
Don't stand for this. Right? You're sitting here like cattle. You have questions. You confront them. They don't want to do it in public.
Okay, the next
Excuse me, buddy. Hey, this is America. This is not a CNN political debate. You're managing the government. Hey, that's right. Parents, you need to question these people. Do the research. It's online. Top 10.
Okay, so the next question to our panelists. The next question to our panelists is Dr. Lowry.
I'm not an activist. I don't have experience. I'm a parent. I have a right to speak.
Okay.
You're asking softball questions.
And again, I do want to be very respectful to everyone who asked questions. And so the next question really is, Dr. Lowry, to you, because you work so closely with 2- and 4-year institutions. Is the Common Core state standards implementation by Maryland an attempt to filter students to the community college?
And now they're concerned.
So I'll repeat the question. Dr. Lowry, because
It's here. What's the name of the video?
Pardon me? Just Google Maryland parent arrested over Common Core.
See, that's what happens when you don't speak up, you don't stand up like that's the only thing I disagree with Ira. Criticize them, stand up to them.
Okay, yes.
I called the Maryland school superintendent. Her name is Lillian something.
Lillian Lowry.
Yes, and then I also called the Baltimore County superintendent, Dallas.
Dallas.
And I told both of them. There are over 600,000 views of that video on YouTube. This is going across the country. It is.
Well, let me just interrupt you for a second, because this is actually, if I could just have your attention, this is actually our action item for tonight. So obviously nobody in this room really liked what they saw. The meeting was designed to control dissent. The questions were screened. The more provocative ones were reworded to take the sting out of them. And it was all about, Ira, what was that? It was disinformation. It was controlling the message. It was framing the argument. It was every little bit of tyranny. And word has it now, I don't know this for a fact, but I also heard that this gentleman was passing out Common Core literature beforehand, the kind of Common Core literature I passed out. And prior to the meeting, he was told that he couldn't pass it out, he would be arrested. Now,
The same guy.
it wasn't the same guy. But it doesn't make any difference. They were going to control that no matter what. So each of you should have a postcard. And essentially this postcard is addressed to Miss Lowry, the superintendent of schools. This is asking her telling her basically we're not too happy with what she did, and for the last meeting, which is scheduled for October the 1st, in Springvale, Maryland, it's about an hour and 10-minute drive from here, and I'll talk about that in a second. We want them to change the format. We want them to change the format so there's actually a full airing. If I ask a question of someone, if I ask you a question, and you give me the kind of you know what kind of answer. And I know that it's you know what kind of answer. It's filled with lies and half-truths. I want to be able to challenge you, because I don't work for the mainstream media. I want to be able to challenge you, and that's what we need to be able to do there. And if they are confident in their message, and they are confident in Common Core, and they really believe in what they're trying to sell, they should be happy to do that. They should feel confident. When people disagree with me about something I'm confident in, and I know I have my facts straight, you can talk to me all day long. Right. Yes, sir?
Auburn County Police Headquarters, when I called them, they said we're not even entertaining discussion on the issue, and hung the phone up.
Right. Well, the charges have been dropped.
Yeah, but hear what they said? The state's attorney said we're dropping the charge.
Right, I know.
It's obvious by the video the man's guilty.
No, it's not obvious.
It won't serve justice to pursue this any further.
So anyway, so what I want everyone in this room to do is, I have 150 of these, and there's, just a second, sir, there's less than 100 of you here. So I would like you to fill it out. Take some home to your friends. After you've filled them out, either give them to me or give them to Bob on the way out. We'll put Betty, just a second. We'll put stamps on them and we will mail them. Then I want you to take the blanks home and I want you to give them to your friends and your neighbors and your co-workers. Then I want you to pick up one of these on the way out. It has Lillian Lowry's phone number, fax number, and email. I want you to call her and give her the same message. And then I want you to have your neighbors, your friends, your co-workers do the same thing. We do not come here the fourth Tuesday of every night to Knights of Columbus Hall to play bingo. We are here to affect real change. And the only way we do it is by following up on this stuff. These people need to hear us. Now, the last thing I want to do is I want to put together a caravan of citizen activists to go down to this last meeting. And I'll be taking names and phone numbers. We need 20, 30 people at that meeting. And I'm not saying, that guy, he kind of got up. He wasn't really asking a question. He was obviously there to make a speech. But he needed to make a speech because the things that he was saying were not going to be said. We should be there respectful, asking questions, demanding follow-up. I don't want any of us to get arrested because I talked to that man's wife, by the way. They went through 3 days of hell. I don't want anybody in this room to have to do that, but you know what? If that's what it takes, sometimes that's what it takes.
And bring video cameras.
And we'll definitely have video cameras. So, fill out your cards, give them to me or Bob on the way out. Take these, tell your family. For each single person here, I want 5 or 10 phone calls going out from every one person here. And 2 questions, and then we want to get Bob up here. Yes?
They dropped the charges on him, but did they charge the officer for assaulting the guy?
I don't think they did. Yes?
3 times that he was an officer.
Yes?
You just need the name on here, your address and phone number?
You can put all of that on here. You can put your address, you can put your county, you can even put a little personal love note there to amend it. Any other questions, Rick?
Quick comment. I just want to say one thing I think has been lost by all this. If the leadership of the school system will do this to a parent, what will they do doing to the children?
I'll tell you what they're doing to the children. They're expelling them for playing with airsoft guns in their own yard. And in their own yard at home, I'm sure you've all heard by now, 2 little boys in Virginia were expelled for playing with airsoft guns in their own yard, their own front yard. This is what we're coming to, people. This is what we're coming to.
And 2 students in California were made to stop handing out copies of the Constitution.
That's right. On Constitution Day.
Hey, they're not in school. How they indoctrinate them?
That's true. Well, that's what Bob is going to tell us. So anyway, one more question, Dan, and then we got to get Bob up here.
It's not them, it's us. If that entire audience would have stood up.
Yeah, right.
Okay, well, how many people are going to come with me? How many people are going to come with me to Springvale? 1, 2, 3, 4. I want more hands. It's October the 1st. It's from 7 to 8:30. It takes about an hour to get there, from here to there. I know some of you work. Springvale is it's in Prince George's County. It's an hour and a half from here. But I get your folks, I'll get your name, I'll get your number. We'll put together something. But I don't want to go down there with a handful of people. I want to go down there with a caravan. Okay, Betty, we need to get Bob up here. Real quick, Betty.
Okay. I don't care to leave. I know we have to sign it. We don't want anonymous things. Just sign maybe my name and my county. With that, you think that's
Sure, your name and your county is fine.
The other thing is, let's remind them, like I did the Maryland State Legislature, they work for us. We pay their salaries.
Sure, very good. That's a good point. So, anyway, having said that, Bob is here to talk to us about Common Core. He's going to give us more information, so when we talk to people, we can fight some of the disinformation and misinformation that's out there. You'll probably remember Bob. He used to be a member of Campaign for Liberty here on our steering committee, and he has just done an awesome job up in Cecil County getting Campaign for Liberty going up there. He's been doing a lot on Common Core, and so he's here to share with us what he's learned. So, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. I know Common Core's been talked about, 3 times at this meeting so far. I'm going to go over some stuff that I don't think has been touched on that goes back to the roots of Common Core and the ideology of those who are trying to get Common Core implemented. Because I think it's very important to understand who's behind it, who's funding it, and what their mindset is. And I want to start this off by repeating a point that Cindy Sheraton, I know a lot of you know Cindy Sheraton here, has made, and it's probably the most important thing to take away. And that is that Common Core is just the latest and greatest government control scheme to take over schools. We can beat Common Core, but they're just going to come right back with another program that's going to be the same type of thing. So the key to this is that we must start electing politicians and forcing politicians to understand the proper role of government in education. Okay? So that's key. Now there's been a lot of arguments with Common Core as far as, are the standards more rigorous and comprehensive? I've heard that a million times. But what I'm going to tell you here and make you aware of, to me, all of that kind of stuff is kind of like asking, is the cheese that's in that mousetrap any good or not? Because in the end, it doesn't matter. Because if you're going to reach down and take it,
dead mouse.
Okay? So, I'm going to get into this real quick. This slideshow, Common Core, the Trojan Horse of Education, it is done by a lady named Karen Bracken out of Tennessee. A lot of the stuff that's in here, I researched long before Common Core was around, a lot of the connections, so I already had to jump on knowing some of the players in this and what they're all about. When I was putting together my first thing for Cecil County Campaign for Liberty, I came across her speaking, and I said, wow, she's got everything already all together. There's no real reason to reinvent the wheel. So I took her slideshow, added some stuff that was pertinent to Cecil County and what we were doing up there, and kind of just went with it. Her presentation is up on YouTube. If you search Karen Bracken, and the actual name of that video is Subversive Threat to Education. You'll find it very easy on YouTube. It's about an hour long. I'm condensing a lot of her stuff down, putting in some of my own, but really, you could listen to it 3 or 4 times and you'll catch something new every time you see it. So I highly recommend you jump on YouTube, find that, and check it, and you'll see some of the parallels to what we got. So,
What was it called?
it is called Subversive Threat to Education. If you YouTube search Karen Bracken, that video was at the top when I searched it the other day. So even if you don't remember the title, if you can just search Karen Bracken, you'll come across it. Okay, so first slide here is how did this happen? In February 2009, the stimulus plan was hatched, okay? $4.35 billion went to the Department of Education. In a CNN interview, Arne Duncan, Secretary of Education, said that he wanted to be the catalyst for Common Core. So the Federal Department of Education created something called Race to Top, and they made a competition where states could compete. I'm sure some of you have heard this information before, to win federal dollars by jumping in this competition. To successfully apply for Race to Top grants, states agreed to the Common Core standards, sight unseen. So they didn't even know what was in it. They said, man, you're giving us money, I'm in. Okay? So Maryland did not apply the first time through. I don't know why. I've never really looked into why they didn't go the first time. But the second time they jumped into it, they came in 6th place, and Maryland actually was the recipient of $250 million to implement this. Okay. So this is a quick map here. The red states are ones that are working on a rejection of Common Core. We just heard it's going down in Florida. Blue states never signed on to Common Core, although I will say Texas has something, I can't remember the name of it, that's equally as bad. And then the rest of the states, as she notes here, are just waiting for reality to kick in. Okay? So, some interesting facts about the application process. And I'm not going to hit all of these points because some of what she has on here is specific to Tennessee. But the first one, 45 states plus DC applied. Only 11 states plus DC won any money. Okay? All of the states committed to the new standards just by applying, whether they won the money or not. So how'd you like to be the sucker that applied, didn't even get any money out of it, and now you're stuck? Okay? That's most states. Not only was it the money, but there were no child left behind waivers that were added in. So a lot of the stuff that these schools didn't like to have to do, didn't want to do, they were able to get let off because they went with this race to the top. And they did this by a points thing. There was all different things that you could do to win points, and the more points you got, put you higher in for winning the application process. Accepting new standards. If you went with the new standards, they would give you 70 points. If you took the database where you collected information, that was good for 47 points. If you agreed to track children, their family, and teachers, hell, you got 117 points for that. That's really good stuff. But you know what? If you did something that was as meaningless as improving poor school performance, they gave you a whole 50 points for that. Okay? So there's your first clue that something is wrong when improving the school is not nearly as important as data tracking everybody that's going through there. Okay? So, now here's another interesting thing. In phase 1 of Race to the Top, Maine did not agree to the Common Core standards portion of it. They ranked 13 out of 16 with the points for what they were doing. In phase 2, they came back and said, okay, we'll go ahead and throw this Common Core thing in there. By doing nothing else, they went straight to number 1. Okay. All right. So, let's get into who's behind Common Core. You'll hear all kinds of stuff about, no, this isn't federal, this isn't that, and it's all smoke screen. The first player, NGA, National Governors Association. It's kind of like when the government tells you you have an independence card. It really is the exact opposite of what they say it is. The National Governors Association is a trade association, not a government agency. Okay? And there's another group called Council of Chief State School Officers, CCSSO. Together, those two organizations are the ones who came up with the Common Core standards, and they own the trademark to it. Nobody else can change what's in there but them. Okay? So while different school systems can come up with their own curriculum, they have to meet those standards. So, you know, it's like saying, hey, you don't have to run this race this way or that way. No, you don't, but you still have to get to the same finish line. So they are controlling it through that portion. There's another group called Achieve, which was created by the National Governors Association. So it's all this inbred group that's all a part of it. We have this group called Students First, which is headed up by Michelle Rhee. Then we have the Obama administration. Arne Duncan and George Soros are involved. Yes. Okay? Now, you would think the opposite end of the spectrum, but our next group here is Rupert Murdoch and Joel Klein. Now, they are involved through something called wireless generation, which is on the data mining aspect of it. So they're going to be making money on the computerized end of it, and we can get more into that on the other side. Then Another group that's involved, Pearson Foundation. Has anybody heard of Pearson Foundation?
No.
Okay. Yes, Pearson is textbooks. But the interesting thing about Pearson is, over the last few years, they have been quietly buying up every other textbook manufacturer. So right now, what you have is a UK company that owns every other textbook, and you don't know it because they kept the original names of those. So it's all going back to the same source here. Yes. Now, also involved, Bill Ayers and his good friend Linda Darling Hammond. Now, everybody knows who Bill Ayers is, okay? Linda Darling Hammond is of the same mold of Bill Ayers. She was actually Obama's first choice to be the Secretary of Education, but she was even too radical for the progressives, so they said no thank you, and we got Arnie Duncan instead. Next one, Jeb Bush. That may surprise some of you. As we get into this more, you understand that it's not just Jeb, it's the whole Bush family. And I hate to break it to some of you, but they're every bit the same socialist that Obama is. Okay. Another one is Mark Tucker, longtime friend of Bill and Hillary Clinton. We'll get into him a little bit more. And then also this guy, David Coleman. Now, he right now is the head of the College Examination Board, which got $30 million from Bill Gates. And he is saying that they will align the SATs with Common Core. That means if you think you're going to homeschool or private school, sorry, those kids still are going to have to be able to take the same SATs and get the same information. So they're going to trap you if you want to get your kids into college.
Through and through.
Coleman has insisted that teachers must train students to be workers in the global economy. Okay? UNESCO, that's another one. The United Nations Education, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. And then the money backers, the big three, Bill and Melinda Gates, the Walton Family Foundation, and another group, Eli and Edith Broad Foundation. Okay, so now let's go over some of these people individually. Mark Tucker. On November 11th, 1992, now this is where we're getting back to how far this is before what we know just now about Common Core. But in November 11th, 1992, Mark Tucker was responsible for the infamous Dear Hillary letter, okay? This 18-page letter lays out a plan to remold the entire education system into a seamless web that literally extends from cradle to grave and is the same system for everyone. Coordinated by a system of labor market boards at the local, state, and federal levels, where curriculum and job matching will be handled by counselors accessing the integrated computer-based program. That, my friends, is exactly what Common Core is all about. Pointing people into the right direction, rounding them up for the corporations, and then giving that information to your future employers so that they will have access to that. That's part of it. Tucker's ambitious plan was implemented in 3 laws passed by Congress and signed by President Clinton in 1994. The Goals 2000 Act, School to Work Act, and the reauthorized Elementary and Secondary Education Act. These laws establish the following mechanisms to restructure the public schools. Number 1, they can now bypass all elected officials on school boards and in state legislators by making federal funds flow to the governor and his appointees on a workforce development board, which is pretty much what happened with Common Core. It also allows a computer database, aka a labor market information system, into which school personnel would scan all information about every school child and his family, identified by the child's social security number, academic, mental, psychological, behavioral, and interrogations by counselors. The computerized data would be available to the school, the government, and future employees. Okay? And then also this allows for national standards and national testing, which we know Common Core is loaded in. Okay. UNESCO. This is where the United Nations comes into this. Okay? On December 31st, Reagan withdrew from the U.S. from UNESCO because they're far-left propaganda, they're anti-Western, okay? In 2003, George Bush brought them right back into the fold, okay? Now, from those of you who have followed Agenda 21, we know that Agenda 21 was brought back into this country under the same President Bush at the time, and we also know the ties of Agenda 21 with the United Nations. The Washington Times in January 18, 2004, learning globally, the Bush administration has begun issuing grants to spread a United Nations-sponsored school program that aims to become a universal curriculum for teaching global citizenship, and that is IB, International Baccalaureate. You've probably heard of that before. George Walker's IB Director General in Geneva said in June, the program remains committed to changing children's values so that they think globally rather than in a parochial parochial national terms from their country's own viewpoint. The IB curriculum, UNESCO said, would promote human rights and social justice and the need for sustainable development, which is Agenda 21, and address population health, environmental, and immigration concerns, all of which we are doing now. In my research in Cecil County, I go to the Cecil County school system's homepage on the internet, and here is the greeting that you get. Our mission is to provide an excellent pre-kindergarten through graduation learning experience that enables all students to demonstrate the skills, knowledge, and attitudes required for lifelong learning and productive citizenship in an ever-changing global society. Folks, it's already in our local schools. It's already made its way through. Okay, so we go over a little bit more on UNESCO. UNESCO, one of its first efforts in 1949, a textbook titled Toward World Understanding, used to teach teachers what to teach, said, as long as the child breathes the poisoned air of nationalism, education and the world-mindedness can produce only rather precarious results. As we have pointed out, it is frequently the family that infects the child with extreme nationalism. Okay? So we see this mindset, right? The prime mover for UNESCO back in 1945 was Julian Huxley. Does anybody recognize the name Huxley? Okay. Huxley, his brother, was the author of Brave New World. The question now becomes, is Brave New World fiction or is it their plan? Okay? So, now, Julian Huxley was in the Eugenics Society. Is anybody here familiar with the term eugenics? Yeah. It is pretty much the Hitler creation of a master race, calling out the weak, creating a better society through birth control and all those kind of methods. That's the short answer, okay? In 1947, Huxley wrote, thus, even though it is quite true that any radical eugenic policy will be for many years politically and psychologically impossible, it will be important for UNESCO to see that the eugenic problem is examined with the greatest of care, and that the public mind is informed of the issues at stake, so that much of what is now unthinkable may at least become thinkable. So they have been talking about changing this mindset since 1945. Okay? Let's get on to Bill Gates. Most people think Bill Gates is simply the computer guy. The guy who went with Microsoft, made a lot of money, and now he's the super nice guy that's traveling around the world trying to help people. Yeah, right. I got some stuff for you.
Crimes against humanity.
In Paris, on November 17, 2004, Bill Gates signed a cooperation agreement with UNESCO. On signing every page of this agreement, Bill Gates and the Microsoft agrees to support the objectives of UNESCO Constitution, the UNESCO Constitution, and to advance Millennium Development Goals for basic education. Okay. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is a major funder of Common Core. They have spent approximately $173 million to bribe anyone that gets in the way and form partnerships that give him total control. The National PTA, Achieve, NGO, CCSO, all these groups we just talked about, and NCEE is just the short list of people who have gotten money from Gates Foundation. Now, in 2011, Gates joined up with who? Pearson, the same people buying up all the textbooks, to create a partnership to offer online courses and ebooks. In 2012, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the British government co-host a New London conference on eugenics. And with global coalition partners such as American Planned Parenthood, who was founded by Margaret Sanger. If you guys look up Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, you will find that she actually advocated for the extermination of blacks and said they were weeds. Okay? That's how far this woman was into this stuff. So that is where your Planned Parenthood in this country comes from. Also, there was Marie Stopes and the United Nations Population Fund. Now, interesting to note, Bill Gates' father was actually a member on the national board of Planned Parenthood. So this has been going through the family for years. Okay? And Bill Gates is also heavily invested in Monsanto, which is another story that we can touch on here in a second. Now,
they're everywhere.
To show what Bill Gates and all the different stuff that he is into, I just went through and I pulled a few of many, many different headlines of different things that he's been involved in. Just to show you again, if this guy is funding this and this is what he believes in, you better be worried. Okay, number one. First thing was growing DC presence for Gates Foundation. President Barack Obama has been in office less than 4 months, but already his administration has recruited at least 4 high-ranking officials from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations. And the appointees went to the U.S. Department of Education, Agricultural, and the State Department of the State. So that's one. Next headline. Bill Gates, some days I wish we had a system like the UK to give Obama more power. Yeah, that's what we need. Next headline. This is a story from the Washington Post, and it talks about $1.1 million that Gates gave to come up with these bracelets that will measure how in tune students are with the programs that they're doing. I will touch back on this in a minute, but $1.1 million for your kids to wear a wireless bracelet that some are saying is much like a lie detector test. Yes. Yeah. As far as I know, they don't shock you, but I'm sure that feature can be added. Next one. Billionaires Club in bid to curb overpopulation. America's richest people meet to discuss ways of tackling a disastrous environmental, social, and industrial threat. Some of America's leading billionaires have met secretly to consider how their wealth could be used to slow the growth of the world's population. And you read down here further, it says, Bill Gates, the Microsoft co-founder, discussed joining forces to overcome political and religious obstacles to change. Described as the Good Club, okay, the Good Club, we're back to the old independence card thing again here, by one insider. The attendees included David Rockefeller, Warren Buffett, George Soros, Michael Bloomberg, and media moguls Ted Turner and Oprah Winfrey. And if any of you are familiar with Ted Turner, he is another full-out Agenda 21. Absolutely. Next slide. Bill Gates, Jeb Bush, Oprah, Warren Buffett meeting at South Carolina Island. Basically the same group that we just talked about, except this time we see the emergence of Jeb Bush being brought into the club. Okay? Next slide. Bill Gates favors death panel and vaccines to decrease the world's population. Now this was a presentation a few years ago. And during this presentation, it says Gates rambles on about CO2 emissions and its effects on climate change, which he injects without pause that in order to get CO2 to zero, probably one of these numbers is going to have to get pretty close to zero. He then goes on to describe how the first number, P for people, might be reduced. And this is what he says. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really good job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could perhaps lower that by 10 or 15%. Next slide. Bill Gates wants to register all new babies on the planet for vaccines. He would like to use your cell phones with GPS positioning to make you have to sign up the minute the baby's born. Next slide. Bill Gates will give you $100,000 to build a better condom. Okay? Everything has to do with population. You see how this is going. Okay? Next one. Melinda Gates to host event with top abortion groups. Melinda Gates, wife of billionaire Microsoft founder Bill Gates, will be hosting a family planning summit in London with two of the biggest pro-abortion groups in the world, the UN Population Fund and International Planned Parenthood Federation. All right, and then one more here. I think that's the last one on Gates. Yeah. Last one. Here we go. Bill Gates Foundation buys 500,000 shares of Monsanto. I know this sounds conspiratorial, and I am not making any claims here, but The interesting thing that comes with this is Monsanto has been getting kicked out of most of Europe, okay? The reason, Monsanto is the world's largest producer of genetically modified food, which has been tied to numerous health ailments, such as sterility and infant mortality. Little creepy, okay? All right, next slide. And here we go. Anybody recognize Ted Turner, all the way over on the left? Who's that man next to him? That is Bill Gates Sr., George Soros, and David Rockefeller. One big happy family.
What a beautiful women.
Okay, we can skip this one. Actually, skip that one. Next one. And skip that one. Okay, promoting grit, tenacity, and perseverance. This was a document that came out, and I know that Glenn Beck talked about this a lot for any of you guys that watched that. One of the things in this document, which is a very, very big document, you can pull the full PDF up online, but in there they're talking about how they can, psychological resources and academic mindsets, attitudes, values, beliefs, and behaviors are teachable. Okay, so basically that is a kind of a roundabout way of saying that they can reprogram your kids. Okay, so they talk about the measurements of how they can do that, behavioral task performance, digital measurements, MRIs, facial expression camera, posture analysis, seat pressure mounts, and wireless skin conductance sensor, which is what we talked about a couple minutes ago that Gates was giving money to. Next slide, please. And here we have the picture from the actual manual. There's the webcam that will watch your child as he's working on the computer, the seat that will measure his posture to see how engaged he is, a mouse that will tell how engaged they are, and there's your wireless lie detector bracelet that is proposed. Okay. All right, so I know that you got data mining was kind of talked about here by the last speaker, so I'm going to skip over here to the next slide. Okay, is sustainable development the real driver for Common Core education? Now here's a quote. Generally, more highly educated people who have higher incomes consume more resources than poorly educated people who tend to have lower incomes. In this case, more education increases the threat of sustainability. So, hey, we can't have you getting too smart. You might use up a few more resources than the dumb people do, okay? Now, in addition to that, the EPA actually awards grant money to regions because they have different, the EPA is split up to regions, that alter local education to align with EPA goals. And of course we know what the EPA is doing and working with a lot of this Agenda 21 stuff. So, and then many of these lessons are laced with messages about sustainable and global warming. So, we can go back through a little bit of the history with education. So back in 1991, Bush Sr. endorsed UNESCO. Education for All initiative was promised implementation by 2000. America 2000 was written by NGA, which we know now is the main group that wrote Common Core standards. And who was it chaired by? Governor Bill Clinton, okay? In 1993, after Bush brought back the Agenda 21 treaty, President Clinton then took over the helm, and of course he created the PCSD, which we know is the President's Council on Sustainable Development, which was the first talk of sustainability. That's where Plan Maryland and all the rest of the stuff that we're dealing with now comes from. And in 1994, the President's Council on Sustainable Development published Education for Sustainability, an agenda for action calling on educators to serve society by fostering the transformation needed to set us on the path to sustainable development. And then in 1994, those goals became President Clinton's Goals 2000, which established a framework for our national standards, curriculums, and assessments. All 50 states adopted the goals in 2000 in order to receive the funding that came with it. Just like Common Core, take the money, do what we say, and you'll get the cash. And then in 2002, No Child Left Behind was signed into law with full implementation to be completed by 2014. Okay? So the next slide here, basically, the author that did this highlighted the red stuff. All the stuff that you see in red is basically word for word from UNESCO. So she was trying to make that point that a lot of this stuff, they didn't even use their own words for it. They just copied it straight out. Now, next slide here. Arnie Duncan in 2010. Today, I promise you that the Department of Education will be a committed partner in the national effort to build a more environmentally literate and responsible society. We must advance the sustainability movement through education. Education and sustainability are the keys to our economic future and our ecological future. Okay, so obviously, the head of our education department is fully on board with the sustainable movement. So that's pretty much it as far, and I'm hoping that that shows a little bit of the mindset and where this is coming from before you even have to worry about what's in the curriculums and where it's going from there. So in conclusion, my follow-up to this is that Common Core is basically being implemented by a group of elites, very wealthy people. This is not any one president. This is not Obama Core, as a lot of people would like you to believe, although I'm all for if that makes somebody mad, makes them get out and do something about it, I'm happy to call it that. But this is coming down from money sources that fully support Agenda 21, population control, and sustainability. And they're all tied together. And they need to control the education system so that they can indoctrinate the children of this country and the world into their vision of ultimately how this world should be run. So, something to think about. Again, look in, as I said, check out Karen Bracken. It's worth watching her full thing, even though you've seen this, because there's a lot more information that I didn't get to cover in there. So, thank you very much for listening.
Does anybody know what the alliance of big business and big government is called?
Fascism.
Exactly.
Fascism.
It's getting worse. Well, I just have one word. Wow. I didn't know Bob Willick 2 years ago. And seriously, if you knew how much he has done for this cause and to benefit you and to promote freedom, you would give him a standing ovation right now. I'm dead serious. Because that's good. He's done a ton of work, and this gentleman, by the way, should just stay standing. I'm going to mention that our next meeting is on October 22nd. It comes very early in the month because the fourth Tuesday comes very early because the first day of the month is a Tuesday. So October 22nd is our next Campaign for Liberty meeting because I'm going to let Dave Pridgeon, a man who also deserves a standing ovation, close out the meeting tonight. So let's stand for Dave.
It's good to see everybody tonight. This talk is going to focus on one member of the United States Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. And that person is a Democrat by the name of Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon. And he's a man that I have great respect for, even though he's a Democrat. He has been a champion around the Patriot Act and domestic spying. So, first for a little background. The Senate Select Committee on Intelligence is dedicated to overseeing the United States intelligence community, the agencies and bureaus of our federal government who provide information and analysis for leaders of the executive and legislative branches. The committee was established in 1976 by the 94th Congress. The committee is select, and that membership is temporary and rotated among members of the chamber. The committee comprises 15 members. Okay, so in other words, only 15 people get to see all the classified stuff, all right? And it's comprised of 8 of the seats are reserved for one majority and one minority member of each of the following committees: Appropriations, Armed Services, Foreign Relations, and Judiciary. Of the remaining 7, 4 are members of the majority and 3 are members of the minority. The members on this committee conduct numerous hearings on highly classified information and constantly get classified briefings. By the way, Barbara Mikulski sits on this committee. So the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence oversees what is called the U.S. Intelligence Community, or the IC, a coalition of 17 agencies and organizations within the executive branch that work both independently and collaboratively to gather the intelligence necessary to conduct foreign relations and national security activities. The primary mission is to collect and convey the essential information the President and members of the policy-making, law enforcement, and military communities require to execute their appointed duties. The 17 IC member agencies are, in alphabetical order, Air Force Intelligence, Army Intelligence, the Central Intelligence Agency, Coast Guard Intelligence, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the Department of Energy, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of State, the Department of the Treasury, the Drug Enforcement Agency, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Marine Corps Intelligence, National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, the National Reconnaissance Office, the National Security Agency, Navy Intelligence, and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Ladies and gentlemen, 17 agencies and organizations dedicated to ensure intelligence gathering, yet we still don't have an answer on what happened in Benghazi and even who constitutes the Syrian rebels. Now you'll find this part really interesting. In a March 6, 2008 letter to the Senate leadership, 14 of the 15 current members of the Senate Select Committee proposed the creation of a new Senate Appropriations Subcommittee on Intelligence to prepare the annual intelligence budget for those 17 separate entities. Now, this doesn't sound too bad. The proposed subcommittee, on which members of the Intelligence Committee would be heavily represented, would increase the committee's influence and leverage over the executive branch intelligence agencies and require continuing disclosure of the annual budget for the National Intelligence Program. This proposal has been opposed and held up by the leadership of the Senate Appropriations Committee. And who's that chairman?
Babs.
Senator Barbara Mikulski, yes. Now I want to get to Ron Wyden. So my point with all that is, you know, Wyden's one of the few people, the 15, who get to see everything, okay? So we're speculating a lot on what the NSA's doing and data gathering and all that. So, so the point here is Wyden sees it all. It's this Mikulski and Mark Udall and a number of others. So on July 23rd of this year, Senator Ron Wyden gave remarks on NSA domestic surveillance and the Patriot Act at the Center for American Progress. What I want to do is read for you some of the excerpts of this speech. Quote, "When the Patriot Act was last reauthorized, I stood on the floor of the United States Senate and said, quote, I want to deliver a warning this afternoon. When the American people find out how their government has interpreted the Patriot Act, they are going to be stunned and they are going to be angry. From my position on the Senate Intelligence Committee, I had seen government activities conducted under the umbrella of the Patriot Act, and I knew they would astonish most Americans." Now, some of you might remember we played that clip 2 years ago at a Campaign for Liberty meeting. We put Senator Wyden up there giving that warning. Now, this is Senator Wyden continuing here in July. At the time, Senate rules about classified information barred me from giving any specifics of what I had seen except to describe it as a secret law, a secret interpretation of the Patriot Act, issued by a secret court that authorizes secret surveillance programs. Programs that I and my colleagues think go far beyond the intent of the statute. If that is not enough to give you pause, then consider that not only were the existence and the legal justification for these programs kept completely secret from the American people, senior officials from across the government were making statements to the public about domestic surveillance that were clearly misleading and at times simply false. Senator Mark Udall and I tried again and again to get the executive branch to be straight with the American people. But under the classification rules observed by the Senate, we were not even allowed to tap the truth out in Morse code. And we tried just about everything else we could think of to warn the American people. So in other words, he can't divulge what he's seeing in these classified meetings, but you know, what he's telling us here is all along he's been trying to give us hints. So as we go forward here, and he's saying, well, you know, they could do this and they could do that with the authority that they have. What he's basically saying here, you better believe they're damn doing it. In other words, is what he's saying. So, this is Wyden talking again. Last month, disclosures made by an NSA contractor lit the surveillance world on fire. Several provisions of secret law were no longer secret, and the American people were finally able to see some of the things I've been raising the alarm about for years. And when they did, boy, they were stunned, and boy, they were angry. After 9/11, when 3,000 Americans were murdered by terrorists, there was a consensus that our government needed to take decisive action. At a time of understandable panic, Congress gave the government new surveillance authorities, but attached an expiration date to these authorities so that they could be deliberated more carefully once the immediate emergency had passed. Yet in the decades since, that law has been extended several times with no public discussion about how the law has actually been interpreted. And again, this is all Wyden I'm quoting. Listen to this next part. The result, he's saying here, the result of renewing the Patriot Act. The result, the creation of an always expanding, omnipresent surveillance state that hour by hour chips needlessly away at the liberties and freedoms our founders established for us without the benefit of actually making us any safer. So today, I'm going to deliver another warning. If we do not seize this unique moment in our constitutional history to reform our surveillance laws and practices, we will all live to regret it. I'll have more to say about the consequences of the omnipresent surveillance state, but as you listen to this talk, ponder that most of us have a computer in our pocket. This is Wyden talking, saying this is what they could be doing, but once again, this is the man that's been trying to tap out to us in Morse code what's going on, okay? He says, as you listen to this talk, ponder that most of us have a computer in our pocket that potentially can be used to track and monitor us 24/7. The combination of increasingly advanced technology with a breakdown in the checks and balances that limit government action could lead us to a surveillance state that cannot be reversed. Now this is Senator Wyden in this talk talking about the FISA court. Outside the names of the FISA court judges, Virtually everything else is secret about the court. Their rulings are secret, which makes challenging them in an appeals court impossible. Their proceedings are secret too, but I can tell you that they are always one-sided. This is a Democrat talking here. Everybody remember that, okay? The government lawyers walk in and lay out an argument for why the government should be allowed to do something, and the court decides based solely on the judge's assessment of the government's arguments. That's not unusual if a court is considering a routine arrest warrant, but it's very unusual if a court is doing major legal or constitutional analysis. I know of absolutely no other court in this country that strays so far from the adversarial process that has been part of our system of government for centuries. It may also surprise you to know that when President Obama came to office, his administration agreed with me that these rulings needed to be made public. In the summer of 2009, I received a written commitment from the Justice Department and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence that a process would be created to start redacting and declassifying FISA court opinions so that the American people could have some idea of what the government believes the law allows it to do. In the last 4 years, exactly 0 opinions have been released. Now that we know a bit about the secret law and the court that's created it, let's talk about how it has diminished the rights of every American man, woman, and child. Despite the efforts of the intelligence community leadership to downplay the privacy impact of the Patriot Act collection, the bulk collection of phone records significantly impacts the privacy of millions of law-abiding citizens. If you know who someone called, when they called, where they called from, and how long they talked, you lay bare the personal lives of law-abiding Americans to the scrutiny of government bureaucrats and outside contractors. This is particularly true if you're vacuuming up cell phone location data, essentially turning every American cell phone into a tracking device. Now he's warning us this is something they could do, the man that's been tapping the Morse code, so he's telling us this is what they're doing. He goes on. We are told this is not happening today, but intelligence officials have told the press that they currently have the legal authority to collect Americans' location information in bulk. Especially troubling is the fact that there is nothing in the Patriot Act that limits the sweeping bulk collection of phone records. The government can use, again, he's saying they can use, so you got to read Ron Wyden here, knowing his struggle all these years against the Patriot Act, okay? He says, the government can use the Patriot Act's Business Records Authority to collect, collate, and retain all sorts of sensitive information, including medical records, financial records, and credit card purchases. They could use this authority to develop a database of gun owners or readers of books and magazines deemed subversive. This means the government's authority to collect information on law-abiding citizens is essentially limitless. It is a record, if it is a record held by a business, membership organization, doctor, school, or any other third party, it could be subject to bulk collection under the Patriot Act. Now this is what Senator Wyden had to say about drones. A few months later, my colleagues and I were finally able to get the official Justice Department opinions laying out what the government believes the rules are for the targeted killing of Americans. You probably know this as the drones issue. These documents on killing Americans weren't even being shared with members of Congress on a classified basis, let alone with the American people. You may have heard me say this before, but I believe every American has the right to know when their government thinks it is allowed to kill them. My colleagues and I fought publicly and privately to get these documents, used whatever procedural opportunities were available, and eventually got the documents that we demanded. Since then, listen to this, since then, we've been looking them over and working out a strategy that would allow for the pertinent portions of these documents to be made public. I don't take a backseat to anybody when it comes to protecting genuinely sensitive national security information, and I think most Americans expect that government agencies will sometimes conduct secret operations. But those agencies should never rely on secret law or authorities granted by secret courts. Now, this is what Senator Wyden said in closing. We find ourselves at a truly unique time in our constitutional history. The growth of digital technology, dramatic changes in the nature of warfare and the definition of a battlefield, and novel courts that run counter to everything the Founding Fathers imagined make a combustible mix. At this point in the speech, I would usually conclude with the quote from Benjamin Franklin about giving up liberty for security and deserving neither. But I thought a different founding father might be more fitting today. James Madison, the father of our Constitution, said that the accumulation of executive, judicial, and legislative powers into the hands of any faction is the very definition of tyranny.
Right.
He went on to assure the nation that the Constitution protected us from that fate. So my question to you is, by allowing the executive to secretly follow a secret interpretation of the law under the supervision of a secret non-adversarial court and occasional secret congressional hearings, how close are we coming to James Madison's very definition of tyranny?
We're there. Been there.
I believe we are allowing our country to drift a lot closer than we should, and if we don't take this opportunity to change course now, we will all live to regret it, unquote. Thank you, Senator Wyden. I want to thank everybody for coming. Just know some of us were at LPAC all over the weekend last Thursday, and we saw Justin Amash, Senator Paul, and just the people that are really fighting for us over in Washington. And my heart was lifted before coming here today and watching Senator Cruz and watching Senator Lee and Senator Paul, Senator Sessions get up on the floor and back him up. And let's get home and watch some more C-SPAN and cheer our champions on. Thank you.
Thank you. I know I said let Dave close the meeting, and I was reminded that maybe we should close the meeting in prayer. And just before we do that, Mike has an announcement so that you can follow up and so that you can share this kind of news with your fellow American citizens. And what is our YouTube channel, Mike?
You can just go to YouTube and type in Harford, H-I-H-A-R-F-O-R-D, number 4, sorry, C, number 4, L, video, D-I.
Harford C4L video.
Just put that in the search, enter.
We have a whole channel?
First thing that comes to is going to be the channel. there, and then you can subscribe.
Please subscribe to that channel, by the way. You need a Gmail account probably to do that, so you want to subscribe to that?
If you're not signed in, you'll need to sign in.
Yeah, sign in, subscribe, share that with people. Within about 36 to 48 hours, Mike will have tonight's meeting uploaded to that channel. You can multiply your effectiveness by sending people to that channel. Thank you again to Mike for doing that. And like I mentioned, we do want to close in prayer. And is Lois Ackerman or whatever? Lois, do you mind closing us in prayer today? Because truthfully, without God's help, we are already there. We are slaves and we don't know it. That's pretty much where we're at. So Lois, you close in prayer.
I come in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. I am perplexed, but we're not defeated. And I thank God for that. Our Father, we thank you for your presence. I thank you, Father, that you have given different talents and giftings to each one of us. And each one of us is very important for such a time as this. I look to the scriptures and to know that Esther knew that she was born for such a time as this. I think about all the patriarchs and the struggles that they had, dear Lord. But they kept going. They kept listening, but mainly to you, O God. I thank you, Father, that you have given to us knowledge. But we thank you, Father, for redemption through our Lord Jesus Christ. Father, help us during this time, which is such a time as this, when we see that there is so much perplexity in this world and corruption, dear God. But you have given us life and breath for such a time as this. And Lord, we may not be able to grasp everything that's going on, but you certainly know what is going on. So I thank you, Lord, that you have linked us together for such a time as this. May your will be done, Father God. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Thank you.